At 38 years old, making a steady $61,000 a year as a bus mechanic for the city of Baltimore, Terrence Coleman understood the language of machinery better than he understood the woman he had been married to for a decade. He could diagnose a sputtering engine by sound alone, could feel a misaligned axle through the soles of his $120 Red Wing work boots. But the cold silence that had settled into his own home, a $220,000 row house in Hampton he had poured his own sweat and savings into, was a mystery he couldn't seem to solve. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Rain slicked the narrow street outside, the hiss of tires a constant, mournful sound. In his own kitchen, a room where he had single-handedly installed the $800 subway tile backsplash and the $450 butcher block countertops, Terrence felt like a guest. Simone, his wife, stood before him, a vision of casual expense. She was wearing a $600 Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress, a splash of vibrant silk against the cozy, lived-in backdrop of their life. Her hair, which she'd had professionally styled into elegant twists that morning for $150, was perfect. She smelled of a perfume he didn't recognize, something floral and expensive that cost at least $200 a bottle. She handed him a plate covered in plastic wrap. "I saved you some of the casserole from last night, sweetie," she said, her voice bright and distant, like a radio playing in another room. "I'm heading over to Mama's, just our weekly family dinner." He looked at the plate. It was his own damn casserole, the one he'd made with a $7 pack of ground turkey and a $3 box of pasta. He looked at her, at the flawless makeup that must have cost another $100, at the delicate gold necklace he'd never seen before nestled against her radiant deep brown skin. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that she was not going to her mother Odessa's house to eat leftover casserole. The lie was as loud and clear as a stripped gear, a grinding, painful noise in the quiet of his heart. But he didn't know what to do with that knowledge. He was a man who fixed things, and he had no idea how to fix this. "Okay, honey," he said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "Drive safe. Tell Odessa I said hi." She gave him a quick, dry kiss on the cheek, a gesture as meaningless as the polite honk of a car passing by. "Will do. Don't wait up." He watched her walk out the door, the click of her $700 Stuart Weitzman heels echoing on the hardwood floors he had refinished himself over 3 long weekends. The door closed, and the silence rushed back in, heavier this time. He stood there for a long moment, the lukewarm plate in his hands, a ghost in the house he had helped build. He had no idea just how deep the betrayal ran, or that the woman who treated him like a piece of functional but forgettable furniture was methodically dismantling his life, one expensive dinner at a time. This was just one of many humiliations, a slow and steady erosion of his dignity that was about to accelerate into a full-blown collapse. And he couldn't have known that his quiet strength, the very quality they dismissed, would be the foundation of their undoing. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Tell us in the comments when you knew something was wrong, even if you couldn't prove it yet. Their life hadn't always been this way. Terrence remembered the beginning, with a clarity that felt like a punch to the gut. 10 years ago, they were just 2 people with more love than money, dreaming of a future from the confines of his small rental apartment. He was a younger mechanic then, his hands already calloused, his savings account lean but growing. Simone was a receptionist at a law firm, her ambition a bright, burning flame that he found captivating. They were a team. When his father passed away, leaving him a modest inheritance of $90,000, it felt like a sacred trust. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the sum of a man's life of hard work. Terrence didn't spend a dime of it on himself. Instead, he saw it as the foundation for the life he and Simone had talked about. They found the row house in Hampton, a sturdy brick structure with good bones, but years of neglect. It was listed for $220,000. With his inheritance, he made an $85,000 down payment, a massive chunk that significantly lowered their monthly mortgage to a manageable $950. The deed was in both their names. "We're partners," she had said, her eyes shining as she held his hand at the closing. "Everything is ours. Together." He believed her. He poured the rest of his energy into that house. The plumbing was ancient, a network of galvanized pipes that groaned and shuddered. A plumber quoted them $4,000 to replace it. Terrence shook his head. "I can do it," he said. He spent 2 weeks in the crawl space, his knuckles raw, surrounded by the smell of damp earth and rust. The cost in PEX tubing and fittings from Home Depot was just $350. He felt a surge of pride when he was done, the water running clean and silent through the new veins of their home. He rewired the flickering lights in the living room, a job that would have cost $700. He did it himself with $60 worth of wire and new outlets. He patched the plaster, painted the walls with $400 worth of Benjamin Moore paint, and spent a month of Saturdays sanding and refinishing the original heart pine floors until they glowed. Simone would watch him, a complicated expression on her face. "You're amazing, baby," she'd say. But there was a subtle distance in her tone he was just beginning to notice. While he was investing his time and what little money he had left into their shared asset, her focus was elsewhere. She would browse online stores, sighing over a $1,200 Louis Vuitton Speedy bag. "It's an investment piece, T," she'd explain. "It holds its value." He'd look at his hands, stained with wood varnish and grease, and then at the screen. He couldn't make the logic connect. To him, an investment was the new $1,800 water heater he'd installed in the basement, something that provided comfort and security. A purse was just a purse. Her mother, Odessa, didn't help. Odessa was a woman who carried herself with an air of unearned aristocracy. She lived in a small, rented apartment, but spoke as if she presided over a grand estate. When she visited their home, she would survey Terrence's handiwork with a thin smile. "It's just wonderful what you can do with your hands, Terrence," she'd say, the compliment landing like a veiled insult. Simone is so lucky to have such a practical man around. One afternoon, while he was fixing her perpetually running toilet for the third time, a simple $8 flapper valve replacement, he heard her say to Simone in the other room, "He's a good man, a simple man. You need that kind of stability." The word simple stuck with him. He wasn't simple. He rebuilt complex transmissions. He understood hydraulic systems. He could take a sputtering, dying engine and make it sing. But in their eyes, because his work involved grease and tools instead of spreadsheets and conference calls, he was simple. He fixed things. He didn't own them. He didn't move in the world of brands and status that was becoming increasingly important to Simone and her mother. The facade of their domestic normalcy was thick, built on his labor and his money, but hairline cracks were starting to appear, and he could feel a cold draft blowing through. The weekly family dinners at Odessa's became the focal point of the creeping coldness in their marriage. At first, they were just an annoyance. Simone would insist on going alone. "It's just girl talk, honey," she'd say. "You'd be bored." He'd accept it, happy for a quiet evening to work on his passion project in the garage, a rusted-out 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle he'd bought for $3,500. It was his sanctuary, a place where metal and mechanics made perfect sense. But then the dinners became more frequent, sometimes twice a week. Simone started dressing for them in a way that didn't add up. Why wear a new $400 Kate Spade dress to eat spaghetti at her mother's cramped apartment? She would come home late, well after 11 p.m., her cheeks flushed and her eyes overly bright. She'd smell faintly of wine and a rich, savory aroma that was definitely not from Odessa's kitchen. One night the scent was unmistakable. It was steak. The kind of expensive, perfectly seared steak you get at a place with white tablecloths and a 3-digit bill. "How was dinner?" he asked casually, looking up from the TV. "Oh, good," she said, avoiding his eyes as she bustled around the kitchen, getting a glass of water. Mama made her famous lasagna. He could smell the char of a grill on her clothes, a scent that clung to her expensive $180 Chanel No. 5 perfume. He said nothing. The lie hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. He felt a knot of anger and confusion tighten in his stomach. Why was she lying about something so small? It was the accumulation of these small, pointless deceptions that began to build a wall between them, brick by brick. The public humiliations were worse. They were invited to a birthday party for one of Simone's colleagues from the law firm. It was at a chic wine bar in Fells Point, a world away from Terrence's usual neighborhood haunts. The bar tab for a round of drinks was easily over $150. He felt out of place in his best $90 button-down shirt and clean jeans amidst a sea of $800 sport coats and designer dresses. One of Simone's friends, a woman named Chloe, dripping in delicate gold jewelry, turned to him with a practiced, overly friendly smile. "So, Simone tells us you're in transportation. That must be fascinating. What exactly do you do?" Before Terrence could even open his mouth to say, "I'm a lead mechanic for the MTA," Simone jumped in, her voice a little too loud, a little too smooth. "He works for the city," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's very stable." Her mother, Odessa, who had tagged along, added her own flourish of condescension. "Terrence is just wonderful with his hands, a real problem solver." The table went quiet for a beat too long. Terrence saw Chloe and another friend exchange a quick, knowing glance. The message was clear. He's the simple, blue-collar husband. She married down. In that moment, Terrence felt his entire identity, his pride in his skill and his work, reduced to a patronizing footnote. He was not a partner. He was an accessory they were slightly embarrassed of. He looked at Simone, who was now laughing at some joke, completely oblivious to the wound she had just inflicted. Or worse, she wasn't oblivious at all. Then came the credit card statements. He was the one who managed their finances, a responsibility he took seriously. He paid the bills, balanced the budget, and tracked their spending. The American Express card was in his name, with Simone as an authorized user. It was for emergencies and shared expenses. Suddenly, the balance began to balloon. He saw a charge for $450 at the Capitol Grill in Harbor East. He knew that restaurant. It was where lawyers and bankers made deals over $70 porterhouse steaks. He knew for a fact Odessa considered it sinfully overpriced. When he brought it up, Simone had a ready answer. "Oh, that! Mama won a gift certificate at her church raffle. We decided to treat ourselves. You worked so hard, honey. We figured we deserved a little fun on your behalf." Another lie. He could feel it. A week later, a $300 charge from the Elk Room, an exclusive speakeasy he'd only read about. "A bachelorette party for a girl from the office," she claimed. "I had to go." Each lie was smoother than the last. She was getting better at it. He felt a rising tide of outrage, a hot, sick feeling in his chest. She wasn't just lying. She was using his money. The money he earned during 10-hour shifts in a loud, dirty bus depot to fund a life he wasn't a part of. The final devastating blow came on a quiet Saturday afternoon. He was in the garage, the one place he felt sane. The Chevelle was up on jack stands, its guts exposed. He was meticulously cleaning a carburetor, the familiar smell of gasoline and degreaser a strange comfort. The garage was attached to the house, and the small window leading into the kitchen was cracked open to let in the breeze. He heard Simone's voice, low and conspiratorial. She was on the phone, likely with her mother. He usually tuned out her calls, but something in her tone made him pause, his hand hovering over the engine block. "I know, Mama, I know," Simone was saying, her voice laced with a frustration he'd never heard directed at him. It's a temporary situation. Daniel understands? He's been so patient." Daniel? The name hit him like a physical blow. Who the hell was Daniel? Then came the words that would be seared into his memory forever. Simone sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's different with him, Mama. He gets it. He owns things. He has his own real estate portfolio. Terrence. Well, you know Terrence. He fixes them." He fixes them. The wrench slipped from his hand and clattered onto the concrete floor. He stood there, frozen, his ears ringing. All his work, his pride, his contributions, reduced to a simple, dismissive verb. He wasn't a builder. He wasn't a partner. He was the handyman. A useful, simple tool to be kept around until a better, shinier one came along. In that moment, the love he had carefully nurtured for a decade curdled into something cold and hard. He knew his marriage was over. He just didn't know the full, staggering scope of the betrayal. He had no idea they weren't just disrespecting him behind his back, but were actively planning a new life on his dime, a life that was about to be made official in the most galling way imaginable. The discovery came on a Tuesday night, exactly 4 days after he overheard the phone call. The rain had returned, a steady, miserable drizzle that matched the cold dread that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. It was 7:15 p.m. He was on the couch, pretending to watch a basketball game, the score and the players a meaningless blur. He had spent the last 4 days in a state of suspended animation, moving through the motions of his life, a silent observer in his own tragedy. He made coffee, he went to work, he came home. He spoke to Simone in short, non-committal sentences. He was a machine running on fumes. He heard her key in the lock. The door opened and she swept in, bringing a gust of damp, cool air and the scent of her expensive perfume. She was glowing. There was no other word for it. Her skin seemed luminous, her eyes sparkled, and her smile was wide and genuine, in a way he hadn't seen it directed at him in years. The sight of her happiness was like a knife twisting in his gut. "Hey, sweetie," she chirped, dropping a shopping bag from a high-end boutique onto a chair, a $2,400 Burberry dress, he would later learn. She walked over to him and held out a small, crisp white envelope. It was from an expensive paper goods store, the kind of place that charged $10 for a single card. "This is for you," she said, her voice soft and indulgent. "Just a little something to say thank you for being so patient and understanding with me and Mama lately. I know I've been a little preoccupied." He took the envelope. His fingers felt numb. He could feel the stiff rectangle of a gift card inside. He opened the unsealed flap. A $50 gift card to Home Depot fell into his lap. The irony was so bitter, it almost made him laugh. "Here, handyman. Go buy yourself some more tools." "Thanks, honey," he mumbled. "That's thoughtful." But as he looked inside the envelope, he saw it wasn't empty. A thin piece of paper, folded into a small square, was tucked deep inside. It must have been stuck to the gift card. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she saw it. "Oh, that's just trash. A receipt or something." She reached for it, but he was faster. He pulled it out. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy drum beat against his ribs. The paper was thick, slick, and expensive. He unfolded it. It was an invoice. At the top, in elegant embossed lettering, was the name of a restaurant he'd only heard of in hushed, reverent tones. The Bygone, a lavish, panoramic restaurant and bar perched atop the Four Seasons Hotel in Harbor East. The date on the invoice was from last Saturday, the night Simone had called him, her voice thick with fake concern, to say that Odessa had a terrible migraine, and she needed to stay the night to take care of her. His eyes scanned the itemized list, and the world tilted on its axis. Private dining room rental, $500. Custom menu, 12 guests, $2,200. Champagne toast, Veuve Clicquot, $600. Wine and cocktails, $420. Tax and gratuity, $135.50. Total, $3,875.50. His breath hitched. It was a staggering amount of money, more than he made in a month after taxes, but it was the small, handwritten note at the bottom of the invoice that shattered him completely. Scrawled in feminine, loopy handwriting, he recognized it as the restaurant manager's from a previous charge, were the words, "Congratulations on your engagement, Simone and Daniel. So thrilled we could be a part of your special night. Engagement. Simone and Daniel." His blood ran cold. He felt lightheaded, the sounds of the room fading to a dull roar. He looked further down the page, to the very bottom line, the one that detailed the payment. His eyes locked on the words, and he felt the last fragile thread of his reality snap. Payment method, Amex, 8012. It was his card, his American Express, the one he had worked overtime to pay down last month, the one she was only supposed to use for groceries and emergencies. She had hosted her own engagement party to another man, with her mother and friends in attendance, and she had paid for the entire lavish, celebratory affair using his money. And then, in an act of either supreme carelessness or breathtaking cruelty, she had handed him the evidence, tucked inside a pathetic, insulting thank you gesture. He looked up at her. She was standing frozen, her face a mask of panic. The glow was gone, replaced by a pale, waxy sheen. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. He folded the invoice with painstaking precision, the creases sharp and deliberate. He slipped it into the pocket of his jeans. He picked up the $50 Home Depot gift card from his lap and held it up. "Thank you, Simone," he said, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. "This is very, very thoughtful." She stared at him, her eyes wide with fear, finally understanding that the simple man she had dismissed for so long was not simple at all, and he had just been handed the perfect tool, not to fix something, but to tear it all down. The next morning, the world felt both hyper-real and completely disconnected. Terrence woke up at his usual 5:30 a.m., the habit ingrained in his bones. For a moment, as he lay in the dark, he could almost pretend that the slick, folded invoice wasn't sitting on his nightstand, a venomous snake coiled in the quiet of his room. He could almost pretend that the woman sleeping beside him, her breathing soft and even, wasn't a stranger who had celebrated her betrothal to another man on his dime. But the illusion shattered the moment his eyes opened. He didn't confront her. A confrontation would be loud, messy, and ultimately unproductive. It would give her the chance to lie, to cry, to manipulate. The man who had overheard his wife dismiss him as a simple fixer had died 4 days ago in his garage. In his place was someone colder, more methodical. He was no longer trying to repair his marriage. He was documenting its demolition. He slipped out of bed, went to the kitchen, and started the $150 Cuisinart coffee maker, the one she'd insisted they needed. He moved with a quiet purpose, his actions a perfect imitation of his normal routine. When Simone came downstairs 20 minutes later, her face drawn and anxious, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands. "Morning," he said, his tone even. He didn't look at her. He was staring at the grain of the butcher block countertop. "Morning," she replied, her voice a nervous whisper. She poured herself a cup, her hand trembling slightly. "Tea? About last night?" "What about it?" he asked, finally meeting her gaze. His expression was placid, unreadable. "I got a great night's sleep. Ready to tackle that faulty ignition system on the 34 bus today." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the storm she knew she had unleashed. She found nothing. Just the calm, steady gaze of her husband, the mechanic. Relief washed over her face, so potent it was almost comical. She had gotten away with it. He was too simple, too trusting to understand the implication of what he'd found. He probably thought engagement was just a fancy word for a party. The condescension in her relief was a fresh, sharp sting. "Oh, okay, good," she stammered, forcing a bright smile. "Have a good day at work, sweetie." He just nodded. The act was exhausting. Every normal word, every mundane gesture was a lie. He felt like he was holding his breath, a deep, painful pressure building in his chest, but he held it. He was playing a long game now. That day, during his lunch break, he didn't eat. He sat in his beat-up 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it and pulled out his phone. He logged into the American Express account. With methodical precision, he began to scroll back, month by month, for the entire year. He downloaded every single PDF statement. He saw the charge for the bygone, $3,875.50, still pending. Then he went deeper. A $2,400 charge at a Burberry store 2 weeks ago. A $1,250 charge at a spa resort on the Eastern Shore a month before that for a signature couples package. A string of dinners at Baltimore's most expensive restaurants, always for 2 or more people, always on nights she was supposedly with Odessa. He opened a notes app and started a list. When he was done, the total was nauseating. In the last 6 months alone, she had charged $27,450 to his card for her secret life with Daniel. That evening, he continued his investigation. While Simone was in the shower, humming a tune he'd never heard, he logged into their joint savings account. This was the account where they were supposed to be building a nest egg for their future. The balance was lower than he expected, much lower. He scrolled through the transaction history. 3 months ago, on a date he remembered because it was the day after his birthday, there was a single, massive withdrawal. $15,000. The memo line was blank. He remembered that week perfectly. Simone had come to him with a story, her eyes wide with feigned worry. "Mama's roof is leaking again, T. The contractor said it's a total loss. They need to replace the whole thing. It's going to be 15 grand. She had looked so convincing. He, the ever-practical fixer, had agreed. "Of course, honey. Family is family. Use the savings." Now, a cold certainty settled over him. He pulled out his phone and called a number he knew by heart. "Hey, Mike, it's Terrence Coleman. Got a quick question for you." Mike was a local roofer, a good man who had done work for half the people in their neighborhood. "Yeah, T, what's up? Did you happen to do a roof replacement for a woman named Odessa Vance over on Charles Street in the last few months?" There was a pause. "Odessa Vance? No, man. Haven't done any work for her. I'd remember that. Why?" "No reason," Terrence said, his voice flat. "Just checking on something. Thanks, Mike." He hung up the phone. The final piece clicked into place. The $15,000 hadn't gone to a new roof. It had gone straight into the pocket of Simone and her new life. It was a brazen, calculated theft. He felt a wave of pure, cold fury wash over him, so intense it made him dizzy. But he pushed it down. Fury was an emotion. He was dealing in facts now. He had the invoice. He had the credit card statements. He had the bank records. He had everything he needed. He was no longer a husband. He was a plaintiff. The following Monday, Terrence called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. He told his supervisor he had a stomach bug, a lie that felt insignificant compared to the mountain of deceit he was living in. At 9 a.m. sharp, he walked into a modest law office in a less glamorous part of downtown Baltimore. The sign on the door read, Hassan and Associates, PLLC. A union buddy who had gone through a nasty divorce himself had given him the name. Aliyah Hassan, his friend had said. She's a shark, but she fights for the working guy. The office was clean and professional, but without the ostentatious luxury of the firm where Simone worked. There was no marble, no vast reception area with abstract art, just functional desks and the quiet hum of diligence. Aliyah Hassan was a sharp, intelligent-looking black woman in her 40s, her hair in immaculate locks tied back with a silk scarf. She wore a simple but well-tailored suit that probably cost a reasonable $500, not an extravagant $3,000. Her eyes were keen and missed nothing. She gestured for him to sit, her expression serious. "My colleague said you had a sensitive marital issue," she began, her voice direct. "My rate is $450 per hour. Tell me what's going on." Terrence didn't stumble. He didn't get emotional. He had rehearsed this. He opened the worn leather briefcase his father had given him and began to lay out his evidence on her polished mahogany desk. First, he placed the invoice from the bygone in the center. "This is an invoice for my wife's engagement party to another man. It was charged to my credit card," he said, his voice level. Aliyah picked it up, her eyebrows raising slightly as she read the details. She looked from the invoice to Terrence, a new level of respect in her gaze. Next, he laid out the printed credit card statements, with every suspicious charge highlighted in yellow. Beside it, he placed a single sheet of paper. "This is a spreadsheet I created," he explained. "It itemizes $27,450 in fraudulent charges over the last 6 months. Then came the bank statements from his personal savings account from before the marriage, what Juan Sis and Skaking Banj, showing the $90,000 inheritance. He followed it with the HUD statement from their home purchase, clearly showing the $85,000 down payment originating from that same account. Finally, he presented the statement from their joint savings, with the $15,000 withdrawal circled in red. My wife told me this was for her mother's new roof. I have confirmed with a local roofer that no such work was done." He sat back. The evidence lay on the desk between them, a silent, damning testament to Simone's betrayal. Aliyah Hassan was quiet for a full minute, her sharp eyes moving from document to document. She tapped a long, manicured finger on the engagement party invoice. "Mr. Coleman," she said finally, her voice imbued with a new steeliness, "you have done 90% of my job for me. This is one of the most well-documented cases of marital waste and fraudulent dissipation of assets I have ever seen." She leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen. We will file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. But that's the easy part. The house is your primary concern. The deed is in both your names, which complicates things. However, you have provided a clear and indisputable paper trail showing that $85,000 of the equity came directly from your separate premarital funds. That is yours." She paused, her eyes locking on his. "Furthermore, we will argue that she has deliberately squandered marital assets, the $15,000 from savings, and the $27,450 from the credit card. We can go after her for half of that amount, which is $21,225. What we can do, and what I recommend, is to secure your interest immediately. We will file a liens pendens, which is Latin for suit pending, more commonly known as a lien. We will file a lien against the property for the total amount she owes you, $85,000 from your inheritance, plus the $21,225 in squandered assets. That's a total of $106,225. Terrence did the math in his head. The number was staggering. What does a lien do? It attaches to the title of the house like a bulldog, Aaliyah explained, a grim smile touching her lips. The property cannot be sold. It cannot be refinanced. The title cannot be transferred to anyone, not her fiancé, not a new buyer, until your lien is satisfied in full. It effectively freezes their biggest asset. Given what you've told me about this Daniel character being a real estate investor, I imagine a cloud on the title of his new fiancé's home will be problematic. The plan was beautiful in its cold, legal precision. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about taking the foundation of her new life, the house he had paid for and physically built, and making it the anchor that would drag her entire deception into the light. My legal fees for the filing and the initial divorce proceedings will be approximately $7,500, Aaliyah said. Terrence didn't even hesitate. He thought of Simone's dismissive words. He just fixes things. Let's do it, he said. When can we file? The strike was not a dramatic confrontation. It was silent, precise, and executed with the cold efficiency of a legal document. For 2 more weeks, Terrence lived in the house, a phantom of normalcy. He continued his act, playing the part of the oblivious, simple husband. Every polite good morning, every shared meal he choked down, was a testament to his newfound self-control. He was gathering his strength, preparing for his exit. Simone, convinced she had dodged a bullet, had grown bolder. She barely bothered to hide her late-night texts, smiling down at her phone with a lover's glow. She spoke openly of Daniel's new project, or Daniel's opinion on the market, as if he were a casual friend and not the man she was secretly engaged to. She had no idea that with every careless word, she was simply confirming the narrative for a lawsuit that was already in motion. The opportunity came on a Friday. "I'm going with a few of the girls from work to the Eastern Shore for the weekend," she announced. "Just a little spa trip before the busy season at the firm." Terrence knew "the girls" was a code word for Daniel. He just nodded. "Sounds nice. Have fun." The moment her car, a white BMW 3 Series, he was still making the $550 monthly payments on, disappeared down the street, his plan kicked into high gear. He didn't own a lot of things. His life was not measured in designer labels or luxury goods. He had his clothes, his father's old leather briefcase, and his tools. The most important things were in the garage. He had spent the week packing them into discreet, sturdy boxes. He had already signed a lease on a small but clean 1-bedroom apartment in Locust Point, a quiet neighborhood across town, for $1,300 a month. He called 2 of his most trusted friends from the depot, men who knew how to keep their mouths shut. They arrived in a borrowed pickup truck. In less than 3 hours, they had moved everything that was truly his. He took his clothes, his personal effects, and the framed photos of his parents. He took every single tool from the garage, from the massive $1,500 Snap-on toolbox to the smallest screwdriver. The Chevelle would have to wait, but his lawyer had already assured him it was legally his property. He left everything else. The $3,000 sectional sofa they had picked out together, the $1,500 smart TV, the Cuisinart coffee maker. He left the bed they had shared. He wanted nothing that was tainted by her betrayal. As a final act, he walked through the house one last time. He saw the life he had tried to build, the love he had invested. He felt a pang of sadness, not for the woman she had become, but for the woman he thought she was. Then he placed his key on the now empty butcher block countertop, walked out, and locked the door behind him for the last time. On Monday morning, Aliyah Hassan filed the divorce petition and the lien. A process server, a burly ex-cop who charged a flat $100 fee, delivered the papers to Simone at the row house that evening. Terrence imagined the scene. Simone, probably still glowing from her weekend with Daniel, opening the door to a stranger who handed her a thick stack of legal documents. He pictured her face as she read the words dissolution of marriage. Then her confusion turning to horror as she saw the lease pendants and the staggering sum attached to it, $106,225. For months there was silence. Terrence focused on his new life. He set up his small apartment, organized his garage space, and poured his free time into the Chevelle, finding solace in the methodical work. The divorce proceeded slowly through the courts. Simone, through her high-powered lawyer from the firm where she worked, contested everything, claiming the money was a gift. The spending was mutual, but Aliyah calmly presented the evidence, and the legal gears ground on. Then, 6 months and 2 weeks after he had walked out the door, the phone call came. It was a Wednesday night, around 8 p.m. Terrence was in his new garage, a rented but spacious unit, meticulously polishing a chrome bumper he'd just replated for $400. His phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was choked, frantic, and unmistakably male. Is this Terrence Coleman? This is he, Terrence said, his voice calm. There was a sob, a desperate, gasping sound. This is Daniel Richardson, Simone's fiancé. Terrence said nothing. He simply stood there, the polishing rag still in his hand, listening to the sound of his wife's other life imploding in real time. Man, you have to help us, Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking. We're losing the house. The bank is foreclosing. We've been trying to get a loan modification, but Simone's, her credit is shot. We finally got a buyer, a cash offer. We were supposed to close next week, but they did a title search. He took a ragged breath. There's a lien on it, a huge one. Your lien. The title company won't issue a policy. The buyer walked. The auction is in 2 weeks. We're going to be on the street, man. The desperation poured through the phone, thick and pathetic. Simone, she never told me, Daniel stammered, the words tumbling out between sobs. She told me the house was hers, that you two had an amicable split and you just left. She said you didn't want anything. She never said a word about any money you put in, about a lien. I had no idea. My God, I had no idea. Terrence listened to the man's complete and utter breakdown. He heard the collapse of the fantasy Simone had sold him, the fantasy of the independent woman with her own beautiful home, free and clear. He thought about the humiliation he had endured, the quiet nights spent feeling like a ghost, the condescending remarks from her and her mother. He thought of the words, "He just fixes things." He held the phone to his ear and looked at the gleaming chrome bumper in his hands, a piece of old, discarded metal that he was making beautiful again through his own skill and patience. "Daniel," he said, and his voice was devoid of anger, of triumph, of anything but a profound and chilling finality. "That sounds like a problem for you and Simone, and for her lawyer." He pressed the red button on his screen and ended the call. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound he had ever heard. The phone call from Daniel was only the first tremor of a seismic collapse. What followed was a cascade of frantic, desperate communications, a real-time documentary of a world unraveling. Terrence didn't answer his phone. He let every call go to voicemail, each recorded message a new chapter in the downfall of Simone and her carefully constructed life. First came another call from Daniel, less than 10 minutes after the first. The crying was gone, replaced by a desperate, bargaining tone. "Terrence, man, listen, I'm a businessman. I get it. You want your money? We can work something out, a payment plan, something. Just call me back. We can be reasonable about this, please." An hour later, the first message from Simone arrived. It was not pleading. It was pure, undiluted rage. "How dare you?" Her voice, sharp and shrill, spat from his phone's speaker. "How dare you do this to me, Terrence? After everything, you're trying to ruin my life out of petty jealousy. This is my house. You walked out. You have no right. My lawyer will destroy you for this." The next morning, a new voice joined the chorus. Odessa. Her tone was one of wounded, manipulative matriarchy. "Terrence, this is Odessa. I am just so disappointed in you. After all we did for you, welcoming you into our family, this is how you repay us? By trying to make my daughter homeless? You should be ashamed of yourself. You were always such a good, simple boy. I don't know what's gotten into you." Later that afternoon, Simone called again. The anger had evaporated, replaced by the raw panic of someone staring into an abyss. "T, please," she begged, her voice thick with tears. "Please pick up the phone. I made a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. I know that now. I'll pay you back, I swear. Every penny. Daniel and I, we'll get a loan. We'll do anything. Just lift the lien, please, T. Just for a little while so we can sell the house. Please." Terrence listened to each message once, then deleted it. They were artifacts of a life that was no longer his. He didn't need to hear them again. The consequences, he knew, were now an unstoppable force, a chain reaction he had started with a single, quiet, legal filing. The cascade of consequences was swift and brutal. First, the house. As Daniel had feared, the foreclosure auction went ahead, with the $106,225 lien clouding the title. No legitimate buyer was willing to touch it. The bank took possession of the property, the $220,000 row house, into which Terrence had poured his inheritance and years of labor, was sold at a courthouse auction for a mere $160,000, just enough to cover the primary mortgage. The approximately $40,000 in equity they had built was completely wiped out. Worse for Simone, the bank filed a deficiency judgment against her for the remaining unpaid balance and legal fees, a black mark that would follow her for years. And Terrence's lien? It remained active. It attached to her name, a legal guarantee that if she ever came into any significant money, from an inheritance or a lottery win, his $106,225 would be paid before she saw a single cent. Second, Daniel. The real estate investor saw the full picture for the first time. The woman he was planning to marry was not the asset-rich homeowner she claimed to be. She was drowning in debt, had a foreclosure on her record, and had lied to him as brazenly as she had to Terrence. The lien was not just a financial obstacle, it was proof of a fundamental deception. He was a man whose business depended on credit and reputation. Being tied to Simone was now professional poison. 2 weeks after his crying phone call, he was gone. He packed his things from the now bank-owned house and disappeared from her life, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. Third, Odessa. The matriarch's meddling came with a price tag. To help Simone keep up appearances for Daniel, Odessa had co-signed on a $10,000 personal loan from a high-interest lender. The money, Simone had claimed, was for redecorating. In reality, it had funded a trip to Miami for her and Daniel. With Simone now officially bankrupt and without income, the loan company turned its attention to the co-signer. Odessa, living on a modest pension, was horrified to learn that her checks would be garnished. Her complicity in her daughter's fantasy life ended up costing her a significant portion of her fixed income, a monthly reminder of the price of their shared deceit. Fourth, Simone. The fall was the hardest and furthest for her. In the span of a few months, she lost everything she had built her new identity upon. She lost the house. She lost her fiancé. The friends who had toasted her engagement at the Bygone suddenly stopped returning her calls. The world of expensive dinners and designer clothes, a world bankrolled entirely by the man she disdained, vanished overnight. Humiliated and broke, with a foreclosure and judgments destroying her credit, she had no choice but to move back in with her mother. She left behind the beautiful row house in Hampton for a cramped bedroom in Odessa's small apartment, the air thick with recrimination and the smell of their mutual failure. To make ends meet, she took a job at a Macy's, working the cosmetics counter for $17 an hour. A universe away from the life of leisure she had believed was her destiny. She was surrounded by the very luxury goods she craved, but now her role was to sell them, not to own them. Terence heard about most of this through the grapevine, from his lawyer, from old neighbors. He felt no joy, no schadenfreude. He just felt quiet. He had not sought revenge. He had sought balance. The scales had simply and finally been set right. What's the most satisfying consequence you've ever seen someone face for their actions? Share your story in the comments below. 2 years passed. The steady rhythm of time, work, and purpose had been a healing balm. The anger had long since faded, leaving behind not a scar, but a smooth, solid surface of self-reliance. The late afternoon sun of a perfect Baltimore autumn streamed into a clean, spacious 2-car garage. It smelled of wax, clean oil, and the faint, sweet scent of curing paint. In the center of the garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, sat a 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle. It was no longer a rusted hulk on jack stands. It was a masterpiece of restored American muscle, its body a flawless candy apple red that seemed to drink the light. Every piece of chrome, from the $600 bumpers to the $200 door handles, shone like a mirror. Terence, his deep brown skin glowing with a light sheen of sweat, was torquing the last lug nut on a polished Kragar wheel. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, but he stood with the undeniable confidence of a master craftsman in his own kingdom. This garage was his, as was the sturdy, modest $280,000 townhouse it was attached to. He had bought it a year ago, using the steady savings he had rebuilt, and the small settlement from the divorce. Simone, having declared bankruptcy, had nothing left to give, but the court officially awarded him the Chevelle and his tools, assets valued at over $25,000 post-restoration. He had built this new life, piece by piece, just as he had rebuilt the car. His work at the bus depot was the same, but it felt different now. It wasn't just a job, it was the engine of his independence. The $61,000 salary, once stretched to support a life of illusion, was now more than enough. It was building his savings, paying his mortgage, and funding his passion. He stepped back to admire his work when a movement at the edge of the open garage door caught his eye. A woman stood there, hesitating in the threshold between the sunlight and the shade. It was Simone. He didn't recognize her at first. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, floral print dress from Old Navy that probably cost $40. The expensive hairstyle was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, unadorned ponytail. The mask of makeup was gone, and he could see the tiredness around her eyes, the faint lines of stress that hadn't been there before. She looked her age. She looked real. "Terence?" she said, her voice quiet, uncertain. "Simone?" he replied, his tone neutral. He didn't invite her in. He simply stood his ground, a rag in his hand. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes falling on the magnificent car. "Wow," she breathed. "You finished it? It's beautiful." "Yeah," he said. "I did." An awkward silence stretched between them. She wrung her hands, looking down at her sensible, worn-out flats. I heard you bought a place. It looks nice." "It is," he said. "It's solid. Good bones." Finally, she looked up, and he saw a flicker of the woman he had once known, a raw vulnerability in her eyes. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not for the house or the money. I mean, yes, for that too. But that's not the real reason. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for what I said, for what I thought." Her gaze drifted past him, to the neat rows of tools on the pegboard wall, to the tidy workbench, to the powerful engine of the Chevelle. "You were a good man, Terrence. The best man I ever knew. You built things, real things. I was a fool. I was so busy chasing shiny things, I didn't realize I already had something priceless." He listened, and for the first time, he believed she was telling the truth. He felt a stir of something, not love, not pity, but a quiet, detached empathy. He thought about the rage and humiliation that had consumed him. It was gone. In its place was a profound and unshakable peace. He had forgiven her long ago, not for her sake, but for his. He had to put down the weight of her betrayal so he could have two free hands to build his own future. He looked at her, standing there in the shadow of the life he had built without her. Then he looked at his car, his home, his hands. "I know," he said. The words were not meant to be cruel. They were a simple statement of fact, a final closing of a chapter. He wished her well, a quiet and sincere wish for her to find her own peace. And then he watched her turn and walk away, disappearing into the afternoon sun. He turned back to his car. He realized that some people see wealth in what can be bought: the $2,400 dresses, the $450 dinners, the illusion of status. They spend their lives chasing price tags, believing that what they own defines who they are. He had learned a different truth. True wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you can create. It's in the skill of your hands, the integrity of your character, and the quiet satisfaction of building a life of purpose, piece by piece. He had been dismissed as a man who just fixed things, but he had learned he was a man who could build anything, especially a life of his own. The real value in life isn't what you have, but who you are and what you can build with your own two hands. We all face moments that test our character. It's how we rebuild that defines us. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride, where every story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. If Terrence's journey resonated with you, please subscribe and share so more people can find hope in the power of starting over.